Hello everyone, thank you for being here today for our Bible class for kids who love the Bible. I'm so glad that you're here today, and I hope that you're having a very good day. Today, we're going to talk about one of my favorite stories in all of the Bible. So for today's Bible class, before we even start it, I want to give you 3 hints. I want to see if you can guess the Bible story. Now, if you're in a room with other people and they're trying to guess the Bible story, just keep it really, really quiet and see if they can figure it out too. So if you know it, don't say anything. Just keep it in your mind, and we'll talk about it in a moment. So here is our first clue. Let's draw it out real quick. Do you know what it is? If you figured it out, remember, don't say anything. Okay, there's our first clue. Now let's draw out our second clue. Now we've talked about this person before, but don't say anything. Keep it quiet for a moment and see if everybody else can figure it out. Okay, you got it in your mind? All right, here is our third clue. Now it's a person. We haven't talked about this person before, but we're going to talk about him in just a moment. So if you know the answer already in your mind, just keep it right there as we go through our Bible class. Now today's Bible class is from Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. So I hope that you have your Bibles with you, and if not, you can go back and read our story after we're all done. But remember what we mentioned about Luke last week? The book of Luke is one of the Gospels. Remember, there are 4 Gospels in the New Testament. There's Matthew and Mark, Luke, and John. If you remember, the Gospels tell of the good news about Jesus. They talk about his birth. They talk about him growing up. They talk about all the great things he did, healing the sick and the blind, and those people who had problems walking, those people who even couldn't walk. They also talk about his death, his burial, and his resurrection. I want you to remember that the book of Luke is one of the Gospels. Also, I want you to remember as you go through the New Testament that Luke is the 3rd book of the New Testament. You have Matthew, then Mark, then Luke. Okay, so Luke is the 3rd book of the New Testament. Also, remember that the writer, that is Luke, he was a doctor. So he was a pretty smart guy, and he wrote some really great things. But here's where our story begins today. In Luke chapter 19 in verse 1, it talks about Jesus, and it says, he entered Jericho and was passing through. So Jesus was on a trip, and he came to the city of Jericho, and he was going to pass through the town because he had somewhere that he needed to be. But something really cool is about to happen. And here we go. Remember our clue? One of the clues was a person. In fact, I think it was our last clue that we gave you. And here he is. Now, let me give you another clue and see if you can start to figure out who this might be. Okay, so here's our verse. We already read verse 1. Now let's read verse 2. As Jesus was passing through Jericho, it says in verse 2, and behold, there was a man named Zaccheaus. Do you remember Zaccheaus? It says that he was a chief tax collector and was rich. You remember Zaccheaus. I bet you already know the story. But just don't go anywhere yet. We're going to finish it. We're going to see what we can learn about the story of Zaccheaus. It says, and he, that means Zaccheaus, was seeking to see who Jesus was. But on the account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. Zaccheaus wanted to see Jesus, but Zaccheaus couldn't get through all the crowd. He couldn't get through all of the people. Can you imagine not being able to see Jesus after you've heard about him and all the great things he's done, and you just can't get close enough to see him? Well, that was Zaccheaus. Now we know what Zaccheaus does, right? The next verse in Luke chapter 19 and verse 4 says that that's Zaccheaus, that he ran on ahead and he climbed up in a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. Zaccheaus saw all the crowds following Jesus, and he got a pretty good idea. He thought if he could run in front of the crowds and beat them, then he could find a tree and he could climb up in the tree. He really, really wanted to see Jesus. So it says, and when he ran, he climbed into this tree because he wanted to see who Jesus was. He knew a lot about Jesus, but he had to get all the way up in this tree so that he could see him. Now just picture that for a moment. Picture Zaccheaus, a grown man, and he's up in a tree above the crowds just because he wanted to see Jesus. Now here's what else we know. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he said to Zaccheaus. So Jesus looked up from the crowds of all the people following him. He looked up to Zaccheaus and he told him, Zaccheaus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. All of the efforts of Zaccheaus to run ahead of all the crowd, to climb up in that tree to see Jesus, Jesus tells him to hurry up and come down because I'm going to stay at your house. Can you imagine what that was like for Zaccheaus? He really wanted to see Jesus, so he found the tree. I bet you after that, Zaccheaus was pretty excited. He was pretty happy. Because remember, he couldn't see Jesus. And now, because of his efforts or because of the things that he did, he was able to see Jesus, and not just to see him, but that Jesus was going to stay with him. So it says in Luke chapter 19 and verse 6, so he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. You know what that means? That means that Zaccheaus was pretty excited. He was really excited that Jesus was going to come to his house and that he was going to stay with him. Whew, I just can't imagine the look on Zaccheaus' face knowing that he's got a brand new friend, and his name is Jesus. Now, I want to tell you something about the story that you probably already know, but it's one of those things that whenever something good has a tendency to happen, there's always going to be somebody who's negative. That means that they have a bad attitude. And in the Bible, we read about these people. And here, when we read about Zaccheaus and how excited he was, you would think that everybody around him was going to be extremely happy for Zaccheaus. But that really wasn't the case. There were some people that were mad. And when they saw it, they grumbled, meaning they complained. They kind of said it under the breath. And it says, he has gone in to be a guest of a man who is a sinner. They're talking about Jesus and Zaccheaus. They're saying that Jesus has gone into the house of Zaccheaus, and this man, he's a sinner. But what they didn't understand was, they didn't understand that Jesus came to save sinners, and that Jesus wants to be a friend to everybody, and he wants to help them out so they can go to heaven. So instead of focusing on the bad, notice what Zaccheaus says in Luke chapter 19 and verse 8. It says, and Zaccheaus stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, half of my goods I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will restore it fourfold. What Zaccheaus is saying is, remember, because he was a rich man, that's what the Bible has told us already. He says he's going to give half of what he owns to the poor. And it says if I have defrauded, that means if I have taken anything from anybody that I didn't need to, I'm going to restore it fourfold. Or what fourfold means, 4 times as much. So if Zaccheaus took anything from anybody that he didn't deserve, he was going to pay them back 4 times as much. See, Zaccheaus was really excited about Jesus, and Zaccheaus knew that Jesus was going to be able to help him. He was going to be a friend to him. After that, Jesus said to Zaccheaus, Today salvation has come to this house, since he is also a son of Abraham. Imagine the excitement of Zaccheaus when he learns that Jesus is so happy for Zaccheaus. Now remember, they could have focused on the bad stuff and all the people that were a little bit angry, but Zaccheaus knew that he had Jesus, and he had a new friend, and that friend was somebody special. Remember, he ran in the tree just to see him. Now Jesus was going to go to his house. Now Jesus tells Zaccheaus that salvation has come to his house. What an exciting story. So let's ask the question, what can you learn today? Well, let me mention 4 things really quick that you can learn from the story of Zaccheaus. The first thing is, seeing Jesus changes your life. Just as Zaccheaus really wanted to see Jesus, when he saw him, it changed his life. Now, you and I can't physically see Jesus today, but we can read about him in the Bible. And we can get a picture of everything that Jesus did, and we can try to follow him. So remember, number 1, seeing Jesus changes your life. Number 2, I want you to remember that sometimes we have to move to see Jesus. Remember how Zaccheaus had to climb in that tree because he was too small to see above the crowds? Zaccheaus did the right thing, and he ran ahead to find out more about Jesus. He really wanted to see him. So sometimes we have to move to see Jesus. So remember, number 1, seeing Jesus changes your life. Number 2, sometimes we have to move to see Jesus. And number 3, as you move to see Jesus and as you get closer to Jesus, there's probably going to be some people that aren't going to be happy all the time. They're not always going to be happy because they look at the negative. Instead of seeing Jesus and his life and how Jesus died for us, he was buried and he rose again so we can have heaven, some people just ignore it. They tend to think on the bad side of it, but not Zaccheaus. He was really excited about his new friend and the fact that salvation had come to his house. So, number 1, seeing Jesus changes your life. Number 2, sometimes we have to move to see Jesus. Number 3, not everybody will always be happy. But remember this, number 4, being near Jesus is always good. When we're near Jesus, we're near God's Son. And the closer we get to Jesus, the more that we're going to enjoy heaven when we get to go there. But that's our lesson for today. I hope that you have had fun in our Bible class for kids who love the Bible. So remember, let's be like Zaccheaus. Let's do everything that we can to get close to Jesus because we know that Jesus loves us, he cares for us, and he wants the best. And most of all, Jesus wants to see us in heaven. I hope that you have a great day, and we'll talk to you next week when we have another Bible class for kids who love the Bible.